list, the reason we had you do the big list on the big paper is so that we could put them up on the wall. We're going to put the lists, each of the tables lists up on the wall in the back, and we can refer to them again later. It may be that this is a first iteration, and we think about this a little bit more in the next few days. Next day. Used to the longer version. So again, we're going to undoubtedly have some overlap between tables. So I'd like to start with table here, and then we're going to go around again with 2 at a time until we get everybody's topics. So in terms of your definition of research misconduct, or components of such a definition, what are the items that you would insist on including? Top 2.
Okay. For our group, we have discussed that some of the list of research misconduct is authorship, where we can, some of the author, they just have a free ride.
So false authorship.
False authorship, yes.
Okay, or false attribution of authorship. Okay.
And then the second one is plagiarism.
Plagiarism. Okay. So plagiarism and false authorship. And hold on to your list. Let's see the table in the center.
You want them up on the
Eventually, but one of the things about putting up and down is that it takes time for everybody to move around. So in the middle table, what are your top 2? Or if not your top 2, if they've gotten them already, the next 2. Falsifying. So which do you think are the 2 most important there that are not the ones that the first table reported?
The lack of communication and transparency, especially among the team.
Okay, so lack of communication. Is that something that the entire team is then guilty of misconduct, or is it one person keeps a secret?
One person keeps secrets.
Okay, one person keeps a secret.
Yeah, and also inappropriate authorship.
Okay, they mentioned inappropriate authorship. Would you like to add a second one?
Because, like, let's say some very experienced author, they will misuse their power to make themselves as the first author or the corresponding author.
So misuse of power is something that,
Especially to students.
especially toward students. So this would be a misuse of power in a whole lot of different contexts. Okay, that one is a new one for this group. Good. Okay, table here. Your top 2 that haven't already been named.
Testing. Okay. Our group identifies several different points here. First one is improper qualification or license to conduct, to perform certain research. In this case, is medical veterinary, but misconduct in medical.
So not being qualified to do the work.
And the second one is the breach of rules and regulation related to research.
So violation of the formal rules related to research with animals or humans or biological materials. Good, okay, thank you. And in the back.
So I think for our group, we have decided, lobby for research grants, because that's commonly happening in Malaysia, and also, thank you, more to professionalism, student-supervisor relationship. So it's common in our culture for students to say yes to everything. So it's mostly being misconduct for all the professors and all the junior researchers.
To make inappropriate requests. Yeah. It's a variation on the abuse of power theme in some respects. but it's a slightly different approach to that. Well, it is one of the reasons that we asked you, and realizing that less time than perhaps might have been fun to sit and talk about these themes, you came up with different lists, similar but not exactly the same. And defining misconduct, especially internationally, has been somewhat difficult, both for the purposes of professional understanding and for regulation. How do we punish and regulate if we can't decide on what common standards are for the bad behavior that is really serious? In the United States, which was the first country to formally define under regulatory framework what research misconduct means, we have 3 categories, and many people say this isn't enough. But the falsification of data, the fabrication of data, and plagiarism of ideas, words, or data, that constitutes our definition, regulatory definition of misconduct. Australia adds to it conflict of interest, particularly financial, but not exclusively, and then willful concealment or facilitation of others' research misconduct. So if you know someone else has done misconduct and you don't call attention to it, that's misconduct in itself in Australia. Finland divides its definition of misconduct into 2 parts: fraud, which is fabrication, misrepresentation, which would be more like falsification in our terms, and plagiarism or misappropriation of others' material, data, ideas, or words. And then they talk about misconduct in science, which includes the understatement of other people's contributions to a publication, or negligence in referring to earlier findings, making work that is old look new again. In the United States, the term fraud is typically associated with financial wrongdoing and questions of financial misuse of funds. So we use research misconduct to talk more about the quality of the data and the science itself. But fraud is still a term that's widely used to talk about poor research data, poor research practices that result in inaccurate data. Sir?
I think sometimes also very important to think about the difference between misconduct. It's important to think about what is research misconduct and what are bad behaviors. Because sometimes bad behaviors are not necessarily misconduct, just not a good behavior.
Well,
So,
and part of the problem is if there's no definition of misconduct,
right.
how do you know what's misbehavior and what's misconduct?
But a lot of things are listed in those things we talked about, but they're not on the list. For example, collaboration. These are the things that is not codified. There's no
so-
law, there's no code of conduct for those kind of things. So how do you draw the line?
So, and this is one of the questions. Do you need regulations to tell you what is misconduct? Or have we simply codified what we think are the worst behaviors and called that misconduct? Many people say misconduct when they mean bad behavior. The word got appropriated to refer to something that's regulatory by many, many countries, when it used to be a word that just meant you were not acting well. So this is the problem of a new field. How do we come up with standards that we can all agree on and define the same way? And this exercise is intended to show that we're not there yet. And internationally, we're really not there. There are a number of bad behaviors that we don't punish the same way we do making up data.
I was fascinated by the word fraud that you've used, and I was thinking about spending research grant money inappropriately. But it's something that is being set aside as long as you fulfill your promises of publishing or producing results, and it is pretty rampant, I have to say. Thank you.
Well, and fraud of a financial sort we typically think of as being governed by other regulatory systems and looked at by financial auditors, not by scientists who would say, as you said, I mean, we did the work. And yes, he went to Tahiti or Paris or whatever with some of the money for a conference and spent 3 weeks on the beach. But he was thinking about the research. No, we don't. I had a dean once who said, if you're awake, you're working for me. So when are your ideas stopping? Can you be working on vacation? This would be the question of for us, effort reporting, and are you reporting your work appropriately in a financial context? Not considered research misconduct, but potentially financial fraud. And we separate that out, but we really can't separate it out.
Yes. Thanks.
So one of the things that we typically do in the longer session, we're not going to do today, but in the longer institutes, we like to think about the fact that misconduct is not just an individual behavior, it's something in an institutional context. And to think about the kinds of structures and institutional contexts that may lead people into misbehavior or may prevent them from behaving badly. One of the things we can see in the stem cell case is that fame and fortune may have led Dr. Wong to do things that he might not have done had he not expected all the hero worship that he received. We're not going to do this, but it can be a useful exercise for your students or your colleagues to think about if we can make institutional changes, what would we change? How can we think about making the environment better for good practice and controlling and eliminating as much as possible bad practice? What we are going to do is look at some publication issues, in part because this is an area where there are not specific standards about research misconduct, but this is an area of major controversy and some of the biggest interprofessional fights in science. So the learning goal here is to help you and ultimately your students be able to identify and give appropriate credit for intellectual contributions and to be able to teach students to do so. And the objectives are to be able to articulate first why scientists publish at all, and then who can be an author, how to acknowledge others' contributions that are not authorship, and to think about types of plagiarism and how to avoid them. So to start out, let's spend a couple of minutes thinking, brainstorming, and doing a shout out. What comes to your mind? Why are we all trying to publish? Share ideas. Thank you for the good one. We're going to start with the ideal answer, which is we're sharing ideas. So going to the dark side. What was that? What was your shout out a minute ago?
No, fame.
Fame. Did any of you really expect to be famous? Fame is not one of those things that's renowned, respected. If you had a respected paper, would that feel good? Absolutely.
Fulfilling idealism.
Idealism that we're producing good science and people can recognize it, contributing to the knowledge base.
Yeah, it's the top Maslow pyramid recognition. I mean, that's definitely it. Sorry.
No, if you could use the microphone.
I guess recognition is it. Yeah, it's the top of Maslow pyramid. The moment you publish something in Science and Nature, I mean, it becomes natural. So
Yeah.
thoughts.
What other reasons? Hang on a second. Folks in the back. Has everybody in the room published? Why did you do it? Yes.
Well, for me, for the good side, it's more to communication. Your results, like you need to communicate your results because my result is more to the audience, like the public. Because I did a lot of human trials, so I need the public to know about it.
You're giving back information to the people who participated in your research.
Yeah. On the bad side, I would think it's more like, I don't know, it's in my institution, every researcher need to publish at least 4 a year. So it's more like KPI for the lectures.
So you have to
I
publish.
have to publish 4.
Because if you don't publish, you'll get
Love letter.
fined.
Yeah. We'll get love letter from the dean.
Other reasons? Yes.
Incentive and rewards.
So are there financial rewards for publishing?
Yes. Because researchers are quite poor.
So, yeah, researchers individually may be poor. Research as a enterprise gets a lot of public money. And this goes back to the idea of why to give results back to the public and supporting your research. There's a hand in the bigger.
Job promotion.
Job promotion, absolutely. How many papers do you have to get to be promoted to the next stage?
10.
110? That's a big difference. My institution, we have to have 20 to go from assistant professor to associate professor. So, in fact,
Agree on the financial incentive and for job promotion, but for me personally, it gives you good feeling to publish. I don't know if you feel good to publish, but I
Feels
always
great.
do feel good after you publish.
it feels great to have finished something that gets published. Writing is hard and feels miserable, but getting written feels good. Yes?
I'd like to add on to the point of contributing to betterment of the result.
Absolutely. And to contribute to the advance of your field. And I'm going to answer this last one, so we're going to move on. You want to put your information out there so that others can look at it and tell you, as Jim was saying early on, do you really know what you think you know? Or do your peer reviewers find something that, whoops, I didn't think that. Or I was deceiving myself about it. So publication has a corrective role as well for science. When we think about what journals get out of publication, journals obviously make money. Some of the journals make a whole lot more money than other journals. But journals want honest, accurate, complete information in their articles. And they are looking for good papers. What's interesting about Science and Nature is that they took papers from Huang that may in fact, I mean, the Nature paper didn't appear to be fabricated, but the Science paper, both science papers, had data that was both fabricated and falsified, and photoshopped images that were fundamentally untrue. So when we going to need to plug in or find another power source, or the computer will die. The computer is sending me messages of all sorts. If you can do this, I'm going to talk fast. So I said that Dr. Shatton lobbied science. Reviewers for Science magazine originally reviewed Dr. Huang's first paper, the paper in which he talked about cloning. They rejected it. And Huang had a postdoc in his lab, he did a postdoc in Dr. Shatton's lab, and the postdoc made the connection between the two senior faculty and asked Dr. Shatton if he would review the paper and give some feedback. He reviewed the paper and he saw stars. Here was a man who was about to become extremely famous. Wouldn't it be nice to be his friend? And so he called up Science magazine and he lobbied for the re-review of the paper. Wouldn't it be a good idea to publish it? Wouldn't it be great for science and science's reputation to publish this breakthrough research? Turns out it was not true. Dr. Shatton then was listed on the second science paper as the senior author. But when it was discovered that the data had been manipulated, that the images were photoshopped, he said, oh, I never saw those data. I never saw the original data. Even though he was the senior author, a position that traditionally is associated with taking responsibility for the entirety of the paper and its quality. Some really serious problems of authorship in this case. So Here's a question. Individual cards. In this case, we use green for yes and red for no. Dr. Shatton spoke with Dr. Wong about the data by phone, but said he'd never seen the original data when misconduct was reported. Should he have been an author, not just the senior author, should he have been an author at all? Red for no, green for yes. And we could, I guess, have a yellow if you're not entirely certain. So we have an overwhelming no and two I'm not sure. And the I'm not sure is, I think, I'm sorry, three I'm not sure. The I'm not sure is a very fair answer because the standards of authorship vary in fields. They are becoming more significantly defined, but it's still not commonly the same practice internationally. This is the author list for the second paper in Science. Dr. Wong is first and Dr. Shatton is second, and there are 23 co-authors in between. And I will ask you to think about how many authors you think you can write with effectively. How many colleagues can you actually share the writing process and the intellectual contribution? One of these trainees was one of the trainees who had given eggs to the research. That was her contribution to the paper.
Very cool.
Should she have been an author on that second paper? Green for yes, red for no. Should she have been an author on the paper? And yellow, yes, if you aren't sure. Okay, we have a whole lot of no's, 3 I'm not sure. Folks who aren't sure, why aren't you sure? What is the condition that you might think about giving authorship to this individual?
Because simply that
Yeah, ma'am.
Contributing the both sides of the embryo doesn't mean that they deserve an author to be an author.
Right.
And it all depends also on the rules and regulations that the universities apply.
So-
Norms.
That sounds like a no, leaning towards maybe, but leaning back towards no.
We don't know. Because we get also some requests, for example, human samples. The surgeons actually get us the human samples, but they always say that it's deserved to be an author, but we usually just acknowledge it as a sample provider.
Yeah, but does the patient who gives the sample get to be an author?
No.
Not typically. So why are you saying you're not certain in the back?
Right, I think some of the novel use themselves as specimen, and if they contribute intellectually or not.
This is an important question. We don't know what her intellectual contribution was. Many journals now require a declaration of what each author did. And we hope that that's a truthful declaration. So I'd like you to spend 5 minutes brainstorming at your table. What are the situations that you have seen, complications and questions with authorship? Who gets to be an author? What qualifies for authorship? What do you actually have to do to legitimately be an author on a paper? And then what does it mean to be first author or last author? In my field, being last author means you didn't do much. Which, when I'm on last author on a biomedical paper, I feel good about it until my ethics colleagues say, didn't do much. And then finally, does everybody agree on this, or is there diversity of opinion? So we've got 5 minutes.